They actually laughed when I walked into that courtroom. My own daughter Patricia and her husband Michael, sitting there in their designer suits, snickering like schoolchildren when they saw me shuffle in with my old handbag and sensible shoes. Michael even elbowed the man next to him, probably making some joke about the confused old lady who thought she could defend herself. If you're watching this, subscribe and let me know where you're watching from. You see, 6 months ago, my husband Robert passed away and left me everything. Every penny of his fortune, every investment, every property. Patricia expected to inherit millions, but Robert's will was crystal clear. It all went to his loving wife, Dorothy Hamilton. Not a single dollar to our ungrateful daughter. That's when Patricia decided I must be mentally incompetent. How else could a simple housewife end up with a $60 million estate? She hired lawyers, filed papers claiming I'd forged Robert's signature, that I'd manipulated a dying man. The paperwork painted me as a gold-digging wife who'd somehow tricked her way into an inheritance. I remember sitting in my kitchen that morning, reading the legal documents over my coffee. Patricia was suing her own mother, claiming fraud and elder abuse. She wanted me declared mentally unfit, wanted the court to overturn Robert's will and give her what she believed was rightfully hers. The irony was almost funny. Almost. You see, Patricia had always seen me as just Mom, the woman who packed her lunches, drove her to ballet lessons, and kept house while Daddy worked. She never asked about my life before marriage, never wondered why I had law books in my study, never questioned why judges occasionally sent me Christmas cards. Mrs. Hamilton, her lawyer, James Morrison, had said during our deposition, speaking slowly as if I were deaf as well as stupid, "Can you explain to us how a woman with no legal background, no business experience, and no college degree came to possess such detailed knowledge of Mr. Hamilton's business affairs?" I'd smiled sweetly and told him I'd always been good with numbers, let him think what he wanted. Now, sitting in this courtroom, watching my daughter's confident smirk, I almost felt sorry for what was about to happen. Patricia thought she was so clever, so prepared. She had no idea that her simple housewife mother had been reading legal briefs since before she was born. The bailiff called the court to order, and Judge Margaret Walsh entered. The moment she saw me, her steps faltered slightly. Our eyes met across the courtroom, and I saw recognition flicker in her gaze. Patricia noticed nothing, too busy whispering with her lawyer about their slam-dunk case against the incompetent old woman. But I was wrong about everything I thought I knew about this day. Let me take you back to where this all started, because the real story began the day Robert died, not the day we walked into that courtroom. I was holding his hand when he passed, just like I'd held it for 35 years of marriage. The doctors had given us 6 months, but Robert only lasted 3. Cancer doesn't care about your wealth or your plans. Dorothy, he'd whispered in those final moments. They're going to come for you. They think you don't know anything, but I made sure you'd be protected. Everything is yours, just like we discussed. I'd kissed his forehead and promised him I'd be fine. Robert knew me better than anyone, including our daughter. The reading of the will happened 2 weeks later in Robert's lawyer's office. Patricia arrived, dressed in black, tissues ready, playing the grieving daughter perfectly. Michael stood beside her, already calculating their inheritance in his head. "To my beloved wife, Dorothy Hamilton," the lawyer read, "I leave my entire estate, including all properties, investments, bank accounts, and business holdings, valued at approximately $62 million. The silence in that room was deafening. Patricia's tissue box hit the floor. "That's impossible," she said, voice shaking. "Daddy promised me the house in Martha's Vineyard. He said I'd inherit the business. The will is quite clear. Mrs. Brooks," the lawyer continued, "your father left you a family photo and his watch. To your husband Michael, he left his golf clubs." I watched my daughter's face transform from grief to fury in seconds. "This isn't right. Mom doesn't know the first thing about managing money. She'll lose everything within a year." Michael's voice was harder. "We need to see those documents. This has to be some kind of mistake." But there was no mistake. Robert had been planning this for years, updating his will every time Patricia showed her true colors. like when she borrowed $20,000 for their kitchen renovation and never paid it back. Or when she made fun of my cooking at Michael's promotion party, calling it peasant food in front of his colleagues. Robert saw how they treated me, how they took me for granted. He knew they saw me as weak, incapable, undeserving of respect. After the lawyer's office, Patricia and Michael followed me home. They sat in my living room, the same room where I'd helped Patricia with homework, where I'd celebrated her achievements, where I'd comforted her through heartbreaks. "Mom, be reasonable," Patricia said, her voice honey-sweet now. "You can't possibly manage all this money alone. Why don't you let Michael help you? He's good with finances." Michael nodded eagerly. "We could set up a trust, make sure everything's handled properly. You wouldn't have to worry about any of it." I poured myself tea with steady hands. "I appreciate your concern, but I'm perfectly capable of managing my own affairs." "Are you, though?" Patricia's mask slipped slightly. "Mom, you've never even balanced a checkbook. Daddy handled everything." That's when I realized what they were really planning. The lawsuit papers arrived on a Tuesday morning, delivered by a serious young man who looked embarrassed to be serving a grandmother. Patricia had wasted no time. I read through the petition while my coffee grew cold. According to these documents, I was suffering from dementia, had been manipulated by unknown parties into forging my husband's will, and posed a danger to myself with my irrational financial decisions. The evidence they'd gathered was almost impressive in its creativity. They'd found receipts from when I'd gotten lost driving to Patricia's house last year, clearly a sign of cognitive decline, not just construction detours on unfamiliar roads. They documented my inability to operate modern technology because I'd asked Patricia's teenager to help me set up Netflix. Most damaging was Michael's sworn statement that I'd become increasingly paranoid and secretive about finances, refusing their helpful guidance in managing Robert's estate. My phone rang within an hour of receiving the papers. Patricia's number. "Mom, I'm so sorry you had to find out this way," she said, not sounding sorry at all. "We tried to talk to you reasonably, but you're just not capable of handling this responsibility." "I see," I said calmly. "The good news is, once the court declares you incompetent, Michael and I can take care of everything. You'll have a nice allowance, enough for your needs, and you won't have to worry about all those complicated investments and business decisions." I watched a cardinal land on my bird feeder, remembering how Robert used to say cardinals brought good luck. And where exactly would I live during this arrangement? There was a pause. "Well, the Martha's Vineyard house would be perfect for you. It's smaller, easier to maintain. We'd take the main house, of course, since we have more family obligations." Of course they would. "Patricia, do you really believe I'm mentally incompetent?" "Mom, it's not about belief. It's about reality. You married Daddy when you were 25 and never had a career. You don't understand business or law or money management. This inheritance is too much for someone with your background. As if 30 years of marriage and motherhood had erased everything I'd been before. "I understand you've hired James Morrison to represent you," I said. "How did you—" She caught herself. "See, this is exactly what I mean. You're becoming paranoid, suspicious. It's not healthy." After we hung up, I sat in Robert's study, surrounded by his books and awards. On his desk was a photo from our wedding day. Me in my simple white dress, him looking at me like I held all the answers in the world. Robert knew this day would come. He'd tried to warn me that Patricia and Michael saw me as weak, saw our marriage as a business transaction where I'd contributed nothing of value. I opened the desk drawer and pulled out the envelope Robert had given me 2 years ago. "When they come for you," he'd said, "and they will come for you, open this." Inside was a business card and a note in Robert's handwriting. "Dorothy, call Margaret Walsh. She remembers you. Margaret Walsh, Superior Court Judge." The name seemed familiar, but I couldn't quite place it. I had no idea what was coming next. I decided to visit Patricia one more time before this legal war began in earnest. Maybe, just maybe, I could make her understand what she was doing to our family. Their house was everything mine wasn't. Modern, cold, impressive. Patricia had redecorated again since Robert's funeral, I noticed. New furniture, new art, all paid for with money they'd borrowed from us over the years. "Mom, what a surprise," Patricia said, though her tone suggested it wasn't a pleasant one. "Michael's at work." Good, I thought. This conversation needed to happen between mother and daughter. I sat in their pristine living room. Accepting the coffee, she offered more out of habit than desire. "Patricia, we need to talk about this lawsuit. There's nothing to discuss. You're sick, Mom, even if you can't see it. This legal action is for your own protection." "I'm not sick, sweetheart. I'm grieving, I'm adjusting, but I'm not incompetent." She sat across from me, her expression a mixture of pity and frustration. "Mom, yesterday you called me asking how to transfer money between accounts. Last week you couldn't figure out how to pay bills online. These aren't normal aging issues." I studied my daughter's face, seeing Robert's stubborn jaw and my own green eyes. When had she become so calculating? "Patricia, what if I told you that I've been pretending?" She blinked. "Pretending what?" "Pretending to be helpless, pretending to need help with things I understand perfectly well." For a moment, uncertainty flickered across her features. Then she shook her head. "Mom, that doesn't make any sense. Why would you pretend to be confused?" "Because people treat you differently when they think you're weak. They tell you things they wouldn't tell someone they considered a threat." Patricia's laugh was sharp. "A threat? Mom, you're 65 years old. You haven't worked outside the home in 30 years. What kind of threat could you possibly be?" I stood up, smoothing my skirt. "The kind you're about to find out about." "What's that supposed to mean?" I paused at their front door, my hand on the brass handle Robert had admired when we'd helped them buy this house. "It means, Patricia, that you and Michael have made a very serious miscalculation about who you're dealing with." "Mom, you're scaring me now. This paranoid talk is exactly why we filed the petition." I turned back to her one last time. "I love you, Patricia. I always will. But I won't let you or anyone else steal what your father worked his entire life to build." Driving home, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years. Not fear, not sadness, but anticipation. Patricia thought she was hunting a rabbit, but she was about to discover she'd cornered a wolf. That evening, I made the phone call I'd been putting off. The number on Margaret Walsh's business card rang twice before a familiar voice answered. "Judge Walsh's chambers. This is Dorothy Hamilton. I'd like to speak with Margaret about a case coming before her court." There was a pause. "Dorothy Hamilton? As in Dorothy Mitchell Hamilton?" "Yes. Please hold." Another pause, longer this time, then, "Dorothy? My God, is it really you?" Little did they know, I had been preparing for this moment my entire life. "Margaret," I said into the phone, 30 years of memories flooding back. "It's really me, Dorothy Mitchell. I should have realized when I saw the name on the docket. Hamilton versus Hamilton. Your daughter's suing you?" I could hear the disbelief in her voice. Margaret Walsh had been Margaret O'Brien when we were in law school together at Harvard. We'd studied together, competed together, graduated in the same class of 1982. "She thinks I'm an incompetent old woman who stumbled into a fortune," I said. "She has no idea who I used to be." Margaret's laugh was the same as it had been 40 years ago. "Dorothy, the Destroyer Mitchell. Incompetent? That's rich. Do you remember the Hartwell case? You eviscerated 3 expert witnesses in one afternoon." I did remember. It had been my biggest case before I retired, before I met Robert, before I became just Mom. "Margaret, I need to ask you something. Can you ethically hear this case? Given our history? We were colleagues, not close friends. And it's been decades since we've spoken. But Dorothy, if you're planning what I think you're planning, I'm not planning anything except defending myself against false accusations. With representation, I hope?" I looked at Robert's photo on my mantel. "I'll represent myself." Margaret was quiet for a long moment. "Dorothy, you've been out of practice for 30 years. Law has changed. Are you sure you want to do this?" "I've kept my license active. I've been reading case law, following changes in legal procedure. Old habits die hard. Your daughter's attorney is James Morrison. He's good, experienced in elder law." "I know. I'd been researching him since receiving the lawsuit. He's won 80% of his competency cases. He specializes in families who want to declare elderly relatives incompetent to gain control of their assets." "You realize what you're walking into?" I stood up and walked to my study. surrounded by the law books I'd never gotten rid of, the case studies I'd annotated over the years. "Margaret, do you remember what Professor Williams used to say? Never let them see you coming." Exactly. After we hung up, I spent the evening reviewing my old files. Cases I'd won, strategies I'd employed, the methodical preparation that had made me one of the most feared attorneys on the East Coast. Patricia thought she was dealing with a helpless widow. Tomorrow, she'd discover she was facing Dorothy Mitchell, the woman who'd never lost a case in 15 years of practice, the woman who'd voluntarily walked away from law to raise her daughter, only to have that same daughter try to destroy her. I pulled out a yellow legal pad and began making notes, the familiar process of building a defense coming back like riding a bicycle. Patricia's case relied entirely on the assumption that I was mentally incompetent. But competency isn't just about age or confusion. It's about understanding the nature and consequences of your decisions. And I understood exactly what I was doing. Morrison had made one crucial error in his petition. He'd painted me as a victim of manipulation, suggesting unknown parties had influenced me to forge Robert's will. But Robert's will had been witnessed by 3 people and notarized. The signatures had already been verified by handwriting experts. So where was this alleged forgery? I smiled, making another note. Morrison was fishing, hoping I'd panic and accept a settlement. He was counting on me being overwhelmed by legal procedures, frightened into giving up. Tomorrow would change everything. The morning of our first court appearance, I dressed carefully, not in the designer suits Patricia expected, but in my old navy dress with sensible shoes. Let them think what they wanted. Patricia and Michael arrived at the courthouse looking confident. Morrison had clearly told them this would be a simple hearing, just a formality before the competency evaluation. I sat alone at the defendant's table. No attorney beside me, no briefcase full of documents. Just an old woman with a handbag, exactly what they expected to see. Judge Walsh entered, and I watched Patricia's face for any recognition. Nothing. Margaret had changed over the years, too. Her red hair now silver, her freckles faded, but her sharp blue eyes were exactly the same. "Your Honor," Morrison began, standing with practiced authority, "this is a straightforward case of financial elder abuse and potential fraud. Mrs. Hamilton, the defendant, has been left a substantial inheritance under questionable circumstances." I listened as he painted his picture of me, confused, vulnerable, easily manipulated. According to Morrison, I'd somehow forged my own husband's will, despite having no legal knowledge or understanding of estate law. The plaintiff requests an immediate competency evaluation and temporary conservatorship to protect Mrs. Hamilton's assets from further mismanagement. Judge Walsh looked at me. "Mrs. Hamilton, you're representing yourself in this matter?" I stood slowly, playing the part they expected. "Yes, Your Honor. I couldn't afford an attorney." Patricia actually smirked at that. "Do you understand the nature of these proceedings?" "I believe so, Your Honor. My daughter thinks I'm not smart enough to manage money." Morrison objected. "Your Honor, this oversimplifies serious allegations of mental incompetence and fraud." Sustained. "Mrs. Hamilton, do you understand that the court is being asked to determine whether you have the mental capacity to manage your financial affairs?" "Yes, Your Honor." "And do you wish to contest these allegations?" I looked directly at Patricia for the first time that day. "Yes, Your Honor, I do." Judge Walsh made some notes. "Mr. Morrison, I've reviewed your petition. You're alleging that Mrs. Hamilton forged her deceased husband's will?" "Not exactly forged, Your Honor, but was manipulated into believing she was entitled to an inheritance that should rightfully go to the children." "I see. And you have evidence of this manipulation?" Morrison hesitated slightly. "We believe the evidence will emerge during the competency evaluation, Your Honor." I stood again. "Your Honor, may I ask a question?" Margaret, Judge Walsh, nodded. "Mr. Morrison, you claim I was manipulated into forging my husband's will. But the will was properly witnessed, notarized, and filed. Are you suggesting the witnesses and notary were also manipulated?" Morrison looked annoyed at the interruption. "Your Honor, Mrs. Hamilton lacks the legal knowledge to understand the complexities of this case." "Actually," I said quietly, "I understand perfectly. You're hoping the court will declare me incompetent based on my age and gender, without any actual evidence of mental incapacity or fraud. Isn't that right, Mr. Morrison? The courtroom went very quiet. Patricia was staring at me with wide eyes. Furthermore, I continued, Massachusetts General Law, Chapter 190B requires clear and convincing evidence of incapacity. You've provided character testimony and speculation, but no medical evidence, no psychological evaluation, no concrete proof of any kind. Morrison was on his feet. Objection, Your Honor. Mrs. Hamilton is clearly being coached. Judge Walsh raised an eyebrow. By whom, Mr. Morrison? She's representing herself. That's when I decided to stop pretending. I straightened my shoulders and let 30 years of careful pretense fall away like an old coat. Your Honor, I'd like to present my credentials to the court. I reached into my handbag and pulled out my Massachusetts Bar Association card. Current and valid. Dorothy Mitchell Hamilton, member of the Massachusetts Bar since 1982, license number 847293. The silence in that courtroom was deafening. Patricia's mouth fell open. Michael grabbed her arm, whispering frantically. Morrison looked like he'd been slapped. Judge Walsh examined my credentials with a carefully neutral expression. Mrs. Hamilton, why didn't you mention your legal background earlier? Because, Your Honor, I wanted to see exactly what accusations Mr. Morrison would make against someone he assumed was legally ignorant. I turned to face Morrison directly. You've spent the last 20 minutes arguing that I lack the mental capacity to understand simple financial matters. Yet you never bothered to research my background. Morrison found his voice. Your Honor, this changes nothing. Mrs. Hamilton hasn't practiced law in decades. She's clearly been manipulated. By whom? I asked. My dead husband? You keep mentioning these mysterious manipulators, but you've never identified them. I walked to the center of the courtroom, feeling the familiar confidence return. Your Honor, I practiced criminal defense law for 15 years. I specialized in complex fraud cases. I understand estate planning, trust law, and financial management better than most people in this room. Patricia finally spoke, her voice shaky. Mom, you never told me you were a lawyer. I looked at my daughter with a mixture of sadness and disappointment. You never asked, Patricia. In 30 years, you never once asked about my life before I married your father. Morrison was scrambling now. Your Honor, regardless of Mrs. Hamilton's past career, the evidence shows recent signs of mental decline. What evidence? I challenged. That I asked my granddaughter to help me with Netflix? That I got lost driving to Patricia's house during road construction? Mr. Morrison, if technical difficulties and navigation problems indicate dementia, half the population over 50 should be declared incompetent. Judge Walsh leaned forward. Mr. Morrison, do you have any medical evidence of mental incapacity? We request a full neurological evaluation. Based on what medical grounds? Morrison shuffled his papers, clearly unprepared for this turn. Based on behavioral observations from family members. I almost laughed. Your Honor, my daughter observed me asking for help with tasks I was perfectly capable of handling myself. I wanted to see how they'd treat someone they perceived as helpless. And what did you discover? Mrs. Hamilton? I looked directly at Patricia, seeing the hurt and confusion in her eyes. I discovered that my own daughter views me as an obstacle to her inheritance, not as a person deserving of respect. Morrison made one last desperate attempt. Your Honor, Mrs. Hamilton clearly orchestrated this entire scenario to make her daughter appear greedy. Judge Walsh's expression grew stern. Mr. Morrison, are you suggesting that Mrs. Hamilton manipulated your client into filing a frivolous lawsuit? The trap was closing, and Morrison was walking right into it. During the recess, I watched Patricia and Michael huddled with Morrison in the hallway. Patricia kept glancing at me through the glass doors, her face a mixture of shock and something that might have been fear. Michael was pacing, his phone pressed to his ear. I caught fragments of his conversation, much more complicated than we thought, and need to reassess our position. They'd built their entire case on the assumption that I was a simple housewife who'd somehow stumbled into wealth. Now they were scrambling to understand who they were really dealing with. Morrison approached me during the break, his earlier confidence replaced by cautious respect. Mrs. Hamilton, Perhaps we could discuss a settlement. What kind of settlement, Mr. Morrison? Your daughter is willing to withdraw the competency petition in exchange for a more equitable distribution of the estate. I almost smiled. You mean Patricia wants her inheritance, after all? Mrs. Hamilton, surely you understand your daughter's position. She expected to inherit something significant from her father. Mr. Morrison, my daughter inherited something invaluable from her father. A loving family, an excellent education, and every opportunity to succeed. The fact that she chose to take those gifts for granted doesn't entitle her to his money. But $62 million is a substantial sum for one person to manage alone. Are you questioning my mental capacity again, Mr. Morrison? Because I should warn you, that didn't work out well for you in there. Morrison's professional mask slipped slightly. Mrs. Hamilton, I'll be frank. My clients are reconsidering their approach. They'd prefer to resolve this privately. I'm sure they would. I gathered my purse. But we're past the point of private resolution. Your clients made this public when they filed papers claiming I was mentally incompetent. Now they can face the consequences of their accusations. When court reconvened, Morrison requested a continuance to reassess the evidence. Judge Walsh denied the request. Mr. Morrison, you filed this petition claiming urgency due to Mrs. Hamilton's alleged mental state. You can't now claim you need more time to build your case. Patricia took the stand as their primary witness, and I watched my daughter struggle to reconcile the mother she thought she knew with the woman who just outmaneuvered her attorney. Mrs. Brooks, Morrison began, please describe your mother's behavior following your father's death. Patricia's voice was uncertain now. She seemed confused about financial matters. She asked me questions about banking, about investments. Did these questions concern you? At the time, yes, but now I'm wondering if... She trailed off, looking at me. If what, Mrs. Brooks? If she was testing me somehow. Morrison looked like he wanted to object to his own witness. Mrs. Brooks, do you still believe your mother lacks the capacity to manage her financial affairs? Patricia was quiet for a long moment. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely audible. I don't know anymore. The foundation of their case was crumbling in real time. That evening, Patricia called me at home. Her voice was different, smaller, younger, like the little girl who used to crawl into my bed during thunderstorms. Mom, we need to talk. I'm listening, Patricia. Why didn't you ever tell me you were a lawyer? Why didn't you tell me about your career? I sat in Robert's study, surrounded by the law books I'd never had the heart to donate. Because when you were born, you became more important than any career. I wanted to be your mother, not your lawyer. But you gave up everything for me. No, sweetheart, I chose you. There's a difference. Patricia was crying now. I'm sorry, Mom. I'm so sorry. I thought... Michael said you didn't understand money, that you'd lose everything Dad worked for. And you believed him because you wanted to believe him. It was easier to think I was incompetent than to consider that your father made a conscious choice. Why didn't Dad leave me anything? What did I do wrong? The pain in her voice broke my heart, but she needed to hear the truth. Patricia, your father loved you deeply, but he also saw how you and Michael treated money. You borrowed without paying back, spent without considering consequences. He knew that giving you millions would only enable that behavior. So he punished me by giving it all to you? He trusted me to make the right decisions about our family's future, including decisions about you and Michael. There was a long pause. What does that mean? It means the money was never the point, Patricia. The point was teaching you that love isn't measured in dollars, and respect isn't optional just because someone appears vulnerable. Mom, can we fix this? Can we drop the lawsuit and start over? I closed my eyes, feeling tired suddenly. Patricia, tomorrow Michael is going to ask you to continue fighting. He's going to convince you that I manipulated this whole situation, that I made you look foolish on purpose. How do you know that? Because I've been watching him for 7 years of marriage to my daughter. Michael sees dollar signs, not family. The question is, what are you going to choose? The line went quiet except for Patricia's soft crying. I love you, Mom. I love you too, sweetheart. But love isn't enough anymore. We need respect, honesty, and trust. Until you're ready to give me those things, we can't move forward. After I hung up, I wondered if I'd been too harsh. But 30 years of enabling Patricia's entitlement had led us to this courtroom confrontation. Sometimes love meant setting boundaries, even when it hurt. The next morning brought a surprise. Instead of Patricia and Michael arriving together, Patricia came alone. She looked exhausted, like she hadn't slept. Michael arrived 20 minutes later with a different lawyer, someone younger, more aggressive. He'd escalated instead of backing down. The new attorney, David Chen, immediately requested a sidebar with Judge Walsh. I couldn't hear the conversation. But Morrison looked uncomfortable, and Chen was gesticulating wildly. When they returned, Chen had a new strategy. "Your Honor, we're amending our petition. We now allege that Mrs. Hamilton deliberately deceived her family about her mental state to manipulate them into filing this lawsuit, proving she's unfit to manage a substantial estate. It was actually clever, in a twisted way. Instead of claiming I was incompetent, they were claiming I was too manipulative." Judge Walsh looked skeptical. "Mr. Chen, you're arguing that Mrs. Hamilton is simultaneously mentally unfit and mentally cunning enough to orchestrate an elaborate legal trap? We're arguing that her behavior demonstrates a concerning disconnect from reality and relationships." "Your Honor," I stood up. "Your Honor, may I respond to this new theory?" "Proceed, Mrs. Hamilton." "Mr. Chen seems to be arguing that defending myself against false accusations proves I'm unfit to defend myself. This is circular logic at its finest." Chen shot back. "Mrs. Hamilton deliberately misled her family about her capabilities, then used their natural concern against them." "Natural concern?" I let my voice carry across the courtroom. "Mr. Chen, my daughter and son-in-law didn't express concern for my well-being. They expressed concern for their inheritance. There's a significant difference." I turned to face Patricia, seeing her wince at my words. If Patricia had called and said, "Mom, I'm worried about you. Can we get you a medical checkup?" that would be concern. If she'd said, "Mom, let me help you organize your finances," that would be support. Instead, she filed legal papers claiming I was mentally incompetent without ever talking to my doctor. "My friends, or anyone else who interacts with me regularly." Judge Walsh nodded slightly. "Mr. Chen, do you have any medical evidence supporting claims of mental unfitness?" "We have family testimony about concerning behaviors. Behaviors that Mrs. Hamilton has now explained as deliberate tests of her family's character." Chen was losing ground fast. "Your Honor, Mrs. Hamilton's own testimony proves she's manipulative and deceptive." "Or intelligent and cautious," Judge Walsh replied dryly. I could see the moment Chen realized his new strategy was backfiring. Patricia was staring at the floor, and Michael's face was red with anger. That's when everything changed. "Your Honor," I said, standing slowly, "I'd like to present additional evidence to the court." I reached into my handbag and pulled out a manila folder I'd been saving for this moment. "These are financial records showing every penny Patricia and Michael have borrowed from my husband and me over the past 7 years. Chen jumped up. "Objection, Your Honor. This evidence wasn't disclosed during discovery." "Mr. Chen," Judge Walsh said with barely concealed amusement, "Mrs. Hamilton is representing herself. The rules of evidence are somewhat relaxed for pro se litigants, especially when responding to amended petitions filed the day of trial." I handed copies to the court clerk. "Your Honor, this shows a pattern of financial dependence totaling over $200,000. None of it was ever repaid." Patricia's face went white. Michael grabbed her arm, whispering urgently. "Furthermore," I continued, "I have here a recording of a conversation between Patricia and Michael from last month, discussing their plans to have me declared incompetent so they could finally get control of Mom's money." The courtroom erupted. Chen was shouting objections, Michael was on his feet, and Patricia looked like she might faint. Judge Walsh banged her gavel. "Order. Mr. Chen, I'll hear your objection." "Your Honor, this recording was obtained without consent. It's inadmissible." I smiled. "Actually, Mr. Chen, Massachusetts is a one-party consent state for recordings. Since the conversation took place in my home, with my knowledge and consent, it's perfectly admissible." "Your Honor," Chen tried desperately. "This is clearly a setup." "Yes," I agreed. "It absolutely was. I set up a situation where my daughter and son-in-law revealed their true motivations, just like I set up their assumptions about my mental capacity to reveal their prejudices. Judge Walsh leaned forward. Mrs. Hamilton, did you plan this entire scenario? Your Honor, I knew Patricia and Michael would eventually challenge my inheritance. My husband warned me they would. So yes, I prepared for this possibility. I looked directly at Patricia, who was crying now. I hoped I was wrong about you, sweetheart. I hoped you'd prove me wrong. Judge Walsh reviewed the financial records and listened to key portions of the recording. When she was finished, her expression was stern. Mr. Chen, I'm denying your petition in its entirety. Mrs. Hamilton has demonstrated exceptional mental acuity and legal knowledge. More importantly, she's exposed the true motivation behind this lawsuit. She turned to Patricia and Michael. Mrs. Brooks, Mr. Brooks, this court finds that you filed this petition not out of concern for Mrs. Hamilton's welfare, but in an attempt to gain control of assets you believe you're entitled to. This constitutes harassment and potentially fraud. Michael jumped up. Your Honor, we were genuinely concerned about Mrs. Hamilton's mental state. Judge Walsh's expression could have frozen water. Mr. Brooks, I've just listened to a recording of you saying, and I quote, "Once the old bat is declared incompetent, we can finally live the lifestyle we deserve." The courtroom was dead silent. Mrs. Hamilton, Judge Walsh continued, said, not only are you competent to manage your affairs, you're one of the most competent individuals I've seen in this courtroom. Case dismissed. As Patricia and Michael left with their lawyers, Patricia turned back once. Mom, I'm sorry. I nodded. I know you are, sweetheart, but sorry isn't enough anymore. 6 months later, I sold the big house and moved to a cottage by the ocean. Patricia calls sometimes, and we're slowly rebuilding our relationship on new terms, with honesty, respect, and boundaries. I donated half of Robert's money to legal aid organizations that help elderly people fight against financial abuse. The irony wasn't lost on me. The other half? Well, that's funding a very comfortable retirement for a woman who spent 30 years pretending to be helpless, only to discover she was stronger than she ever imagined. Thanks for listening. Don't forget to subscribe and feel free to share your story in the comments. Your voice matters.